How? Madakiapi. Chawashtia nape chuza pilo. Tachanku heska macha pilo. In my traditional Lakota language, I've greeted you all as relatives, for we believe that we are all related. I've told you that my Lakota name is Holy Road. My non-Indian name is Kevin Aberesk, and I live at 5930 Garfield Street. I'm a journalist who's lived in Lincoln for the past 23 years, and I'm an enrolled citizen of the Rosebud Sioux tribe. I want to talk to you today about a place with a funny name, the Fish Farm. The Fish Farm, for the past 40 years, has served as a site for prayers for our sacred Inipi or sweatlodge ceremony. It was actually established by a revered Lakota holy man, Leonard Crow Dog, who was the spiritual leader for the American Indian movement. And he came here in 1978, along with his father and his wife, also revered Lakota people as well. And they consecrated that ground. They established it so that we might use it in our Lakota and Native community here for our prayers, for our ceremonies. And we've done that for the last 40 years. I can promise you that almost every Native person you've ever met, has probably either been there or prayed there at some point. It was the first sweat lodge I went to when I moved here back in 1999. And I met some incredible people there. Met Myron Long Soldiers, one of the leaders of that sweat lodge at the time. Many of you may know who he was. He served on the Indian Center Board of Directors for many years. I learned many lessons inside that sweat lodge. I learned about leadership and how important it is to be a servant to our people. I learned about the importance of humility, and I learned about how important it is to embrace and recognize our traditional Native identities. This past weekend, I got to actually take my daughter there for her first sweat lodge. And I learned another lesson. I learned to let go. I learned to allow my daughter to suffer, to experience the pain. It's very hot. It's very difficult inside of a sweat lodge. It's essentially a hut, and there's a pit inside of it with hot rocks. And we sit around it, and a medicine person will pour water over those hot rocks. The steam will hit us, and it'll sting our skin, and it just burns. But as we suffer, we pray because we believe that when we suffer, that the Creator will hear those prayers. So I got to experience this with my daughter and let her go. And that's something I'm going to have to practice again, I'm sure, in the future. I don't want to think about it, but there it is. Now imagine, if you are a Christian, trying to take part in communion as hundreds of cars roll by, as trucks with loud exhaust pipes drive by. Imagine trying to listen to a sermon or trying to say a prayer to your Creator as exhaust fumes choke you. This is a real reality that we're facing. This project would bring 575 houses, townhomes, apartment complexes, 1,200 cars daily, according to the staff report. No matter how you try to dress this up, no matter how many accommodations you try to make, it still is what it is. And you can't hide the fact that there are going to be this many homes, this many people, this many cars driving by every single day. And I want to remind you that this comp plan isn't necessarily written in stone, and it's safe to say that when our city leaders considered the future use of this area, they didn't have this particular project in mind. And I can tell you that this project isn't right for this location. Finally, I want to say that I know that some of you are looking at this and considering this a NIMBY issue, a not in my backyard issue. And I would agree with you. This is a NIMBY issue, but here's how it's different than every other NIMBY issue. Wilderness Park isn't just my backyard. It's your backyard. It's our backyard. It's our children's backyard. And we have to preserve it for future generations. The fish farm isn't just my backyard. It's my church. And it's a cultural treasure for our community, and we have to value that. We need to protect it for our community for future generations. Instead of talking about encroaching on Wilderness Park, let's talk about expanding it. Instead of talking about drowning out our indigenous ceremony in noise, pollution, and floodwaters, let's talk about building a permanent buffer around it. Last, I want to say that, isn't this a beautiful thing? This is what community really looks like. We didn't come here to chastise you and make you feel bad. We're here because we care about you, and we don't want you to make a decision that you'll regret later. Thank you. Wapilatanka.
Thank you so much. Good evening. My name is Maya Aparask. I'm the daughter of Kevin, so I live at 5930 Garfield Street. Also, I'm a sophomore at Southeast High School and an enrolled citizen of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe. I'm here today to talk to you about the proposed zoning change for the property at 1st Street and Pioneers Boulevard, and about the massive project plan for that property. But before I do, I want to talk about the sacred Inipi ceremony, which you might know better as a sweat lodge. A few days ago, I had the opportunity to take place in my first Inipi. I was nervous because I knew it was going to be hot and dark inside the sweat lodge. But almost the moment I arrived, I was greeted by warm and welcoming Native and non-Native people who were so glad to see a young person participating in this sacred rite. One of the men there offered to teach me how to powwow dance after I mentioned that I wanted to learn. Another young woman joined us, and the three of us spent several minutes practicing the fancy shawl dance, the jingle dress, and the women's traditional dance. I would say it's an understatement to say that I have 2 left feet, but I can tell you that the people there never once made me feel silly or not Indian enough. It was a positive and empowering circle of people, and it felt good to take that energy into the sweat lodge. And while the experience marks the hottest I've ever felt in my entire life, I didn't get too scared. I had lots of supportive people around, giving me tips on how to endure the heat. Ultimately, the experience allowed me to connect to my spirituality in a truly profound way. And while I've been confirmed in Christianity, I have to say that the Inipi ceremony felt far more profound than anything I've ever experienced. And this brings me to my point and why I'm here. If I had to experience this ceremony as hundreds of cars and trucks rolled by, I can say confidently that it wouldn't have been the same. The peace and serenity of the sweat lodge grounds was beautiful. I listened to the songbirds and the swaying of the trees and grass. I listened to the crackle of the fire and felt its warmth. And I danced. I did all of these things because I was in a place where we were protected from the outside world. Now, many of my Native people are facing a much different reality. Should this massive development be constructed right across the road from the oldest and most heavily used sweat lodge in our community, it will shatter the peace and serenity of that place. Imagine trying to listen to a sermon or sing a hymn to the rumbling and loud exhaust pipes of hundreds of cars and trucks. This to me begs the question, how much are we willing to take from our Indigenous neighbors and from future generations who won't get to enjoy the peace and silence of Wilderness Park and the sweat lodge on Snell Hill? Is there really no other place we can drop a few hundred houses and apartment complexes, other than right next to our city's largest and most biologically diverse park? As a young person, I can tell you that this doesn't feel fair, that I may not get to enjoy everything that Wilderness Park and my community's oldest sweat lodge has to offer. The Native people of Lincoln have so few places where they can go to take part in their traditional ceremonies, where they can go to reconnect to the great mystery, and where they can go to dance. I would simply ask you to respect the sanctity of this sacred place and the right of future generations to get to share in this experience that I had in my first sweat lodge. Wubila Tonka, thank you.
Thank you so much.